Welcome to the Great American Table. This is where history comes alive, and the stories behind America's greatest figures are revealed. Before he became one of the most recognizable presidents in modern history, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was a young man born into ambition, expectation, and pressure. Born in 1917 into the powerful Kennedy family in Massachusetts, he entered a world where success was not simply encouraged, it was expected. His father, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., believed the family was destined for greatness. Politics, influence, and public service were part of everyday life in the Kennedy household. But behind this image of privilege was a hidden struggle. John Fitzgerald Kennedy spent much of his youth battling serious health problems, including chronic pain and recurring illness. Many saw fragility. History would later see resilience. As John Fitzgerald Kennedy grew older, the world around him was becoming increasingly unstable. Economic collapse, rising dictatorships, and global tensions were reshaping international order. He studied at Harvard University, where he developed a strong interest in history and global politics. He focused on how nations rise and fall and how leadership changes the course of events. Even at a young age, Kennedy seemed drawn to one central question: how does a single decision change history? When World War II spread across the world, John Fitzgerald Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy. He became commander of PT-109, a patrol torpedo boat operating in the Pacific. One night, his vessel was struck by a Japanese destroyer and split apart. In the chaos that followed, Kennedy acted instinctively. He helped rescue his injured crew and led survivors through dangerous waters. Despite severe physical strain, he refused to give up. This moment would define his early public identity, not as a politician, but as a man of courage. After World War II, John Fitzgerald Kennedy entered politics. He served in the House of Representatives and later became a U.S. Senator. His youth, charm, and communication skills quickly gained national attention, but Kennedy understood that image alone was not enough in politics. He focused on foreign policy, Cold War tensions, and global strategy. He was preparing himself for something larger than a career. He was preparing for leadership on a global scale. In 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy ran for president against Richard Nixon. The election marked a turning point in political communication. For the first time, television debates became decisive. Millions watched Kennedy appear calm, confident, and composed under pressure. His youth symbolized change in a nation used to older leadership. When the votes were counted, a new generation had taken power. At just 43 years old, John Fitzgerald Kennedy became one of the youngest presidents in American history. A new era had begun. When John Fitzgerald Kennedy entered the White House in 1961, the Cold War was already dominating global politics. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a dangerous struggle for influence, power, and ideology. Every crisis carried the risk of nuclear war. Kennedy entered office young and ambitious, promising a new frontier for America, but almost immediately he faced a disaster that threatened both his presidency and America's global credibility: the Bay of Pigs invasion. In April 1961, a CIA-backed force of Cuban exiles attempted to invade Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro. The operation had originally been planned under the previous administration, but Kennedy approved the final mission. The invasion quickly collapsed. The exiles were outnumbered, unsupported, and trapped. The world watched as the operation failed publicly and dramatically. Kennedy took responsibility immediately. It was a humiliating moment for the young president, but also a turning point. He realized the Cold War was far more dangerous and unpredictable than he had imagined. The failure in Cuba increased tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union. Meanwhile, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev believed Kennedy was inexperienced and weak. The pressure continued to grow in Berlin, where East and West remained divided. In 1961, Construction of the Berlin Wall began. Concrete, barbed wire, and armed guards now separated families, cities, and ideologies. The wall became the physical symbol of the Cold War itself. The world was dividing into two hostile camps. Then came October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. American reconnaissance aircraft discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, only miles from the U.S. coast. For 13 days, the world stood on the edge of nuclear war. Military leaders urged immediate airstrikes and invasion. Others warned that one mistake could trigger global destruction. Kennedy faced the greatest test of his presidency. Every decision carried unimaginable consequences. Inside the White House, tension was constant. Outside, millions feared the end of civilization itself. Instead of launching an immediate attack, John Fitzgerald Kennedy chose a more calculated path. He ordered a naval blockade around Cuba and demanded the removal of Soviet missiles. At the same time, secret negotiations began between Washington and Moscow. For days, the world waited anxiously. Finally, Nikita Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for American concessions. Nuclear war had been avoided. Kennedy emerged from the crisis stronger and more respected on the world stage. But the lesson was clear. Human civilization had entered an age where a single political mistake could destroy millions of lives. After surviving the Cuban Missile Crisis, John Fitzgerald Kennedy emerged on the world stage as a symbol of measured leadership under extreme pressure. But at home, America was facing deep internal change. The civil rights movement was growing stronger, demanding equality and justice for African Americans. Cities were filled with protests, speeches, and rising tension. Kennedy initially moved carefully, balancing political risk and moral responsibility. But over time, he began to take a stronger stance, recognizing that history was demanding action, not hesitation. At the same time, Kennedy pushed forward one of the most inspiring goals of his presidency: space exploration. The United States was locked in a technological race with the Soviet Union, known as the space race. In 1961, Kennedy made a bold national commitment. America would land a man on the moon before the decade ended. This goal was not just scientific, it was symbolic. It represented ambition, innovation, and national confidence. Kennedy believed that great nations prove themselves not only in war, but in progress. By 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy was preparing for re-election. His approval ratings were improving, and his leadership was gaining broader respect. But beneath the surface, political tension remained high. The Cold War was far from over, and domestic divisions were still unresolved. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy traveled to Dallas, Texas for a public appearance. It was meant to be a political stop to strengthen unity and support. Instead, it became one of the most tragic moments in American history. As the presidential motorcade moved through Dealey Plaza, shots were fired. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was critically wounded and rushed to the hospital. Despite all medical efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after. The nation was stunned. The world was shocked. A young president, seen as a symbol of hope and modern leadership, was gone in an instant. The event marked not just the end of a presidency, but the end of an era filled with optimism and possibility. John Fitzgerald. Kennedy's legacy did not end with his death. Instead, it grew stronger with time. His vision for a more progressive America, his handling of nuclear crisis, and his ambition for space exploration continued to shape the future. He became a symbol of potential, of what leadership could achieve, even in a short time. History remembers him not only for how his life ended, but for the direction he tried to give the world. And in that sense, his presidency never truly ended. It continues in the ideas he left behind.